excited for today because we're starting Romanticism, which is, at least for me, a lot of fun and fascinating. So we're going to use today to talk about it and look at a poem and a work of art. Mochi's here. I was worried he wouldn't show up. So we were cleaning out some Christmas decorations and we found this like elf tie. So we put it on him and he's been walking around with an elf, a red and green elf tie for the past couple weeks. He likes it. He looks very formal. He's crying. Yeah, he's a good cat. Okay, so let me pull up. Actually, before I pull up the PowerPoint, one last thing. Some of you know that I'm the faculty advisor of the school's literary magazine, Gazebo. This is one of the magazines from a couple years ago that we make. There are these little publications that feature student writing. I'm right now finalizing our winter edition, and it's going to come out in the next week or two. As I'm putting it together, I thought I'd throw out an offer to any of you. If you're secret poets and you're interested in becoming published writers, send me your stuff and I can find a place to fit in. And if you have a short story, poem, artwork as well, we accept paintings, digital art, sketches, photography, anything like that. You can email them to me and I'll work them in somewhere. Show the cat tie one more time. Sure. There you go. Okay. Yeah, the meow. It's a cute meow. Okay. So any questions before we begin? All right, cool. There we go. All right, so today we're gonna, like I said, start talking about the Romantic movement in art, which was a 19th century artistic movement swept through Europe. We're going to focus on English Romanticism, but we're going to begin by talking about this work of German Romantic art. Before I get to that, Romanticism is kind of an interesting word, right? When you think of romance nowadays, you probably think of buying a box of chocolates for someone that you're fond of. You know, we have Valentine's Day coming up next month. You think of that kind of thing. But the word has like a kind of unusual history. I mean, you might see cats being weird. You might see Roman in it, right? And it comes from, its root word is Rome. And in its original form, it referred to basically early novels, novels that were, you know, in Roman times written in Latin. These, or at least as the language progressed, Romance languages. Okay, so it comes from this idea of Romance languages, languages derived from Latin, and sometimes at some point in the Middle Ages, the word romance became basically synonymous with a certain type of story. You might have heard of medieval romances or chivalric romances. These are stories that feature a gallant knight errant who's going on some quest to save a damsel in distress or defeat evil. Okay, so that's one form of the word. It continued to morph because those stories usually featured characters in the throes of intense passion and romance. It just came to mean intense passion. And that's sort of where we pick up the word in the 19th century. It's a movement not necessarily focused on love, but one focused on the passions and the most intense feelings that humans can experience. So we'll continue to address that, but let's begin with this painting, made famous by being hung up in Mr. Sprenkle's room. You might have seen it elsewhere as well. It's just a pretty famous work of art. It's called Wander Above the Sea of Fog. You might recognize the style because actually my current laptop background is another painting by Caspar David Friedrich, who's one of the big names in 19th century art history. So I want to have us spend some time just looking at this and using this as a case study of the Romantic ideals. This is kind of a, not the best quality image. So in Canvas, I linked to a high resolution version of this. You can go into the Romanticism module that's now live and find the link to Wander Above the Sea of Fog. Open that up and just take a couple minutes to observe, like we do whenever we look at art in here. So what do you notice? What details do you find interesting? So things to think about are how is it actually painted? Just as we look at works of art, works of writing, and consider how is the author using word choice? How are they using literary devices? How are they using structure? How is Friedrich using paint, using composition, using color and shape? And also, what kind of emotions seem to be evoked here, and what sort of attitude towards the connection between humanity and nature do you see evoked? Okay. So just take a couple minutes and observe, see what you come up with. Okay, so you've had a couple minutes here. So what do you think? What stands out to you? What thoughts do you have looking at this? Can raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'll start with Cosmos, who put in the chat, kind of reminds him of the humanism and the place of humanity in the greater world. Definitely agree, and puts an emphasis on the sense of epic exploration. 100%. There's a sense of wonder that's wonderfully evoked with this. Oliver, you can go next.
For me, it also evoked kind of a sense of power. Like the man has scaled the mountain and now he's looking down on nature, almost like he's conquered it.
Good. So perhaps this is a painting that's suggesting that humanity has dominated nature. We're at the top of it and looking down in kind of pride at how far we've come. It's one way to interpret it. Good. Alex.
I recognize the man's superiority, I guess intellectual and kind of like as as a human in general. By the way he's dressed, and like he's standing on a big peak
Hmm.
above all the fray that is the mist.
Yeah, good. What's weird about the way he's dressed, by the way? I mean, weird for us, not necessarily for Caspar David Friedrich. That was for you, Alex.
Oh, well, he's wearing like a dress and he has a cane.
I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a dress. He's wearing like dress clothing.
Oh, well, it looks like yeah. And then he's wearing those big boots, it looks like.
Hmm.
So he looks like he's dressed like royalty almost.
Good. Yeah, it's kind of incongruous that he's wearing this suit, this like green suit, and he's like all the way on top of a mountain. I don't know about you. I don't go out in my, Sunday best when I go for a hike. So there's some sort of contrast here between how he's dressed and the surroundings. Although this would have been like more typical in the time period. This was painted in 1818, I think. This was kind of a uniform for I think German soldiers. So it wouldn't have been as weird then, but kind of stands out here now. Let's go with Phoebe next.
I noticed that he's like at the very center of the painting, and then like looking more into it, it's like his chest or like his heart that's at the center, and I don't know, that kind of still goes with him towering over everything, and his heart is kind of like the center of it all.
That's a good point. I never actually really considered that in all the years that I've taught this. That like, yeah, it's his heart that's at the very center. True. Maybe someone will mention this too. It's kind of the placement of his head is sort of interesting to me, but I'll come back to that. I'll see if someone else will mention it. Colin, what stood out to you?
I know that the sort of, just because we're talking about it in Euro at the same time, that the Romantic period is often sort of defined by reverence for nature
Mhm.
and sort of the belief that human reason can't necessarily prevail over it. So I don't really see it as much as like him dominating nature as much as him pondering how big it is. So I don't see it as like the triumph of man. I see it more as like a man finding his place within nature. But that's
Mhm.
just
Good. Yeah, I think that's an important alternative interpretation of this. I'll touch on this more, but I think one of the things a lot of this type of romantic work shows is that people have a place in nature, but still he's foregrounded, so physically he looks fairly large in the frame of the painting, but still he's dwarfed by his environment, uh, and and there's a sense of him being kind of precarious here. Like it would be very easy for him to fall to his death. So there has to be a healthy balance between reverence and achievement and respect for the danger and power of nature. It always happens that I taught Frankenstein and Romanticism like in November last year, and it's still lined up with AP Euro doing Romanticism. And now I'm doing it in January, and you're doing Romanticism. So I guess a lot of today will be review, but that's okay. There will be I'll have to do like some joint Romanticism project with Miss Cabot. That would be kind of fun. Let's go with Ocean next.
It has like, because it's like so cloudy and there's like a lot of like very light colors, so it's very like light and like airy, so it's very like surreal, and like the hard rocks contrast with like the very light colors and poofy clouds, so there's like a strong contrast showing like nature is like so beautiful and like delicate, but also at the same time it's really like rugged and powerful in a way.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I like how you're paying attention here to again how it's painted. Yeah, the clouds do look light, um, almost ethereal. So almost like he's managed to like pierce the very bottom level of heaven, and he's looking out into this this other kind of almost spiritual realm. And there is that contrast between the lightness of the sky and the harsh, dark colors of the rocks. Good. Luke?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like the same thing as Colin. Like I thought, I interpreted it more as like he's like reflecting on something, and maybe like he's like going to nature to find those answers because, like the like man-made world isn't able to give him those answers.
Definitely those Henry David Thoreau vibes, right? Thoreau was in part inspired by the German Romantic movement. So this is definitely like an early form of transcendentalism here. Same kind of ideas of finding your answers out in nature. Good. How about Christina?
I was going to kind of wrap up like Luke and Colin's point because I was considering the title and how he's like above the fog. And when we think of being like foggy, it's kind of like being confused. And the fact that he's portrayed as being above that fog and above that confusion kind of like shows he might have found his like purpose and like relation to nature. And like his relationship to nature, he's like now fitting in above all like the confusion.
Great. Yeah, I like that, and I liked your point about the title. Wanderer. There's that like phrase you find in like cheesy Instagram posts, like not all who wander are lost, but it kind of reminds me of that feeling of someone who's just out searching for something, not with a particular direction, but just getting away from civilization here. Tessa.
So I did AP Euro last year, so all of my knowledge is slowly
by this point.
But I actually remember seeing, I think this is like, I don't know, I think she showed us this painting at one point. But with Romanticism, since it was all about like the individual and how emotions and how we need to focus more on like our inner selves and nature, I also think it's interesting because Romanticism was right after like the French Revolution, like that's when it came. And just looking at this painting, he does kind of look like this Napoleon kind of conqueror, is just like, yes, look at me, I have conquered the fog. So I think it's just interesting with that time period. But I love the Romanticism period, and I think Tom Ritchie does a video, and it is just absolutely beautiful. And he calls you his Valentine while describing Romanticism. So it's a 10 out of 10.
Okay, cool. I don't know who that is, but I'll look it up.
That is a sin. That is a sin.
Okay, I'll look it up and I'll figure it out, and then I'll make sure I harshly criticize myself for not knowing beforehand. Cool. Hey, great comments from everyone about this. And if you like Romanticism like Tessa, then you'll probably enjoy the next couple of weeks. So just like a couple other things that I'll mention about this. One thing that's unusual here is it's a romantic landscape, and much like taking a cell phone picture today or video, like it's portrait, not landscape, which is kind of unusual. Like usually if you see landscapes, it's horizontal, right? But there's a certain level of sense of verticality to him. Like it places the person right in the center. And also it's kind of unusual that you can't see his face, right? You're behind him, you're seeing what he's seeing. So it's less about his reaction to the environment as placing you in his position to empathize and then see what he's seeing. I mentioned his head, which is placed like right at the horizon. It's like fading in the distance. And he has this kind of like bright blondish reddish hair. It almost looks to me like the sun rising. I'm not sure if this is deliberate, but I feel like it is. There's maybe a sort of connection between like this person and that person appearing like an aspect of nature. You might also note the lines here, the hills in the back sloping down almost like arrows towards him, this crag forming a triangle pointing towards him, the focal point. Was that Christina who pointed out that his heart is in the center? Was that Phoebe? So
It was me.
It was Phoebe.
That was Phoebe, yeah.
pointing right to his heart. So there's definitely a balance here between humans and nature and their place in it. And like I mentioned before, there needs to be this healthy amount of respect. So this balance is what we'll be talking about. I'll try to not dwell too much on it because I guess you've talked about this with AP Euro, but I think it's worth addressing. Okay, so like some people brought up, the Romantic movement kind of fully emerged in the 1800s, and the focus was on personal emotion, subjective experience. It was both a reaction to the Enlightenment, which had come, the century prior, and also an outgrowth of the kind of revolutionary ethos of the time with the American Revolution, the French Revolution. So it was both moving away from the sense of scientific precision that had been dominant, and moving towards a celebration of democracy and the individual, the everyday. If you think about some of the dominant stories prior to the 19th century, a lot of them focused on great individuals, kings, heroic warriors, people doing amazing things. With the Romantics, there was a kind of shift away from that to regular everyday people and their experiences of the world and their experience in nature, and viewing nature as a place where you can go to find healing and connection and answers to your questions, and a certain amount of skepticism of enlightenment and science, which you could kind of see in Frankenstein pretty clearly. Romanticism also was the first movement to prominently feature this concept called the sublime. Okay. The sublime, is used in this day and age to just mean like something that's really great. Like, oh wow, that ice cream sundae was sublime. It was really good. The term itself was coined by this political theorist Edmund Burke, who wrote an essay on the sublime, and it's a concept that refers to something, an experience usually out in nature that is both beautiful and terrifying. Okay. So you could again think of being on top of that mountain. That would be, there's something scary about that. You're way up high. It's difficult to get there. It's dangerous. And yet when you're there, it will also take your breath away, and it's totally astounding. So there's this healthy respect for nature that the Romantics had. It's beautiful, it's healing. You need to get in touch with it and move away from the industrialization that they were starting to see, but it's also incredibly dangerous. And if you don't tread lightly, you're going to get hurt. Here's another example of that. It's more kind of typical Romantic landscape painting of an avalanche. This is more typical in that the humans are kind of dwarfed by the landscape. Think of like Thomas Cole's The Course of Empire, that painting cycle I showed you. People are there, but they're really small compared to the landscape. And there's something beautiful about this avalanche, yet also that you can very easily be destroyed by it if you get in its way. Okay. So what became the dominant form of art and poetry in this period was the lyrical poem, I should say. When we talk about lyrics, we're most often talking about like the words that go to a song, but the word itself, lyrical, is related to a lyre. Some of you might know what lyres are. It's kind of like a mini harp from ancient Greece, and you would have a rhapsode, a poet in ancient Greece, who would have this harp and strum along with it as they were reciting some poem. So it's kind of it's the words that go along with the song. So lyrical poetry is a certain type of poem that is kind of the first person experience of someone sharing their thoughts, not a third person description of something else. It's a kind of almost confessional. That's what a lyrical poem is. Usually recounting some kind of important moment in someone's life or intense emotion. And there was this reconfiguring that happened in the early 1800s towards the individual experience. That was largely due to this guy, William Wordsworth. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He's one of the big names in English, all of English literature, and one of the founders of the Romantic movement in literature. He wrote that for him, what poetry was the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It's an often quoted phrase when talking about Romanticism. Before this, if you were writing a poem, it was kind of like a craft. Think of it like a sonnet, which is a very precise, finely tuned piece of writing. And you would approach it almost like you would approach carpentry, where it's a skill, there's a kind of beauty and symmetry to it, and you got to get things precise. With Wordsworth, he had the view that it was more like just you feel a poet is someone who just feels things so intensely that at some point you just can't hold it in anymore. It explodes out, and then you write a poem to convey this. This is more like what people think about poetry nowadays. Think of the stereotypical teenager who's really like angsty and like is upset about something, goes to his room, it's like, I'm gonna write a poem about this in my diary, and then like writes it down. So that idea of like you feel things so intensely, so you just got to put it on the page, comes from Wordsworth. So we'll look at some examples of this type of writing. You talked about it on January 8th. Okay, so here's one example of Wordsworth's lyrical poetry. This is one of his Lucy poems. There are a few poems that he wrote about this woman that he imagined, fictional character named Lucy, who is, keeping with Romanticism, just kind of like a simple like country girl who died young. This is probably the most famous of the Lucy poems. I'll just read it and you can get a sense of what it's about and how it's romantic. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise, and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. It's like a lovely little poem. I love this. But it's short, direct, and you can tell like there's this woman, Lucy, who lives by herself in the country, a simple, humble life. She dies alone, and the speaker of the poem is just moved and wretched by this loss. It's nothing heroic, nothing, no Beowulf here, right? It's an everyday person, but that loss is felt intensely. Okay, so we'll be looking at poems like this in this unit over the next couple of days. So at this point, any questions or thoughts? Okay, cool. So I want to spend the rest of the period taking a look at another one of Wordsworth's poems. You can find this in Canvas. I'll pull it up and share it. We'll read it once through. We won't do too much about it, but we'll just talk about it a little bit to get more of a sense of these romantic ideas. This one's called "The World is Too Much With Us." Here we go. Hey, anyone want to read this out loud for us?
I can do it if nobody else wants to.
Okay. I don't think anyone else wants to. So thank you, Colin.
Okay. Did I start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon. The winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. Have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn.
Great, thank you. So, we don't have too much time to discuss this, but I could have a whole lesson talking about this, but we'll just do like a few observations. So you could take a minute to read it again. Probably you'll need to make some sense of it. But where do you see some of these ideas of romanticism in this poem? Yes, Alex.
Line 9. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan. That's it's pretty exaggerated, I think.
Sure, there's some intense emotion here. The great God is a shift in the poem. You can hear how that's an alliteration, and it's just two syllables, two stressed syllables, drawing your attention to that. And it's interesting. He says, "I'd rather be a pagan." So there's a looking back here on the ancient world. I would rather be someone who lived in ancient Greece and be someone who believed in like Zeus and the other gods. So let's talk about why that is. He starts the poem by saying the world is too much with us. How might you phrase that in modern talk? What does it mean? What do you think it means to say the world is too much with us?
Day-to-day reality drags down our experience of life.
Sorry, what was that?
Day-to-day over-reliance on normal, mundane, day-to-day life drags down our experience.
Yeah, exactly. Like the hustle and bustle of everyday life is too much with us, is weighing down on us too much. Late and soon, we're always worried about our calendar and our appointments, getting and spending. People are concerned about money. We lay waste our powers. So there's this over-reliance on the hustle and bustle of everyday life. We're laying waste our powers. Powers here you could think of as our ability to appreciate nature, like our natural powers, our human instincts aren't being tapped in. Instead, we're too busy thinking about day-to-day things. So even back then in the early 1800s, people have this, Wordsworth had this very modern concern that we're kind of out of touch with nature, out of touch with our lives. Little we see in nature that is ours. We're failing to appreciate nature. Okay. What else do you notice here? Anything stands out to you? How about this? Anyone? I'll see if you have an answer to this, Colin, and then I'll also hear what you have to say. But anyone know what a sordid boon is? Want to take a stab at that, Colin?
So just sort of going from definitions, like a boon is something that's like a win, like a good thing almost.
Hmm.
And then something sordid is kind of bleak. So I guess if you put that together, it's like kind of like almost like a Pyrrhic victory. Like you lose
Yeah.
more than you get in the sense of the sordid boon. That's just my interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. A boon is like a gift or something grand that you give away or possibly receive if you're the recipient. So there's this sort of Faustian bargain that he's noticing that in modern life, for him, modern was the 1800s, people have accepted industrialization and urbanization and the conveniences of modern life. And what they did for that was they gave up being connected to nature, right? And it's a sordid boon. It's a bad gift, right? You got a crummy deal. You gave up the ability to wander above the sea of fogs to, have appointments and markets and things like that. So he thinks that that's a bad deal. So taking that into consideration, well, actually, let me see, Colin, what else were you going to say?
Well, I was just basically going to say that he kind of like reminds me of like, there's like the joke about people on, social media and stuff that always talk about how they're like born in the generation when they listen to the Beatles like one time. and he kind of seems like almost like the romantic version of that, like, the classic, like, born in the wrong generation guy.
Yeah, should have been born in like 500 BCE. Yeah, that's fair enough. That's what I was gonna talk about this last section next, so we could address that too. But Oliver, what did you notice?
Yeah, from like lines 5 to 9, I think, like the sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds, like all of this nature is kind of going on, and humans don't really have any time to really appreciate it or be moved by it. It says it moves us not. It doesn't really affect us anymore because we're so disconnected from nature.
Yeah, perfect. Right in the middle of it, you do have this lovely natural imagery, and this is what we're out of tune with. We've lost touch with it. You can sort of imagine someone writing this poem in 2021. Like these are still issues that we're dealing with. So he ends the poem by saying, "I would rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. I would rather be a pagan who was born and learned an outdated creed or set of beliefs, right? So I might have sights of Proteus rising from the sea or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn." We have a couple allusions here. Anyone know who Proteus and Triton are?
Figures in Greek mythology? Ocean? Or
They
something?
are, yeah. Do you know like specifically?
I believe Proteus is like the god of the primordial ocean, and Triton is associated with Neptune.
Yeah, good. So Triton is it's kind of like a sea creature who comes out from the ocean, humanoid, who has a conch shell that he's blowing. Proteus, there are different versions of him, but he shows up in the Odyssey. He's this kind of shape-shifting sea monster. Agamemnon wrestles with him. You might maybe remember this from reading the Odyssey in 10th grade. But basically he's a shapeshifter who comes lives in the ocean. So why do you think Wordsworth would rather live back then? Why is he so nostalgic for the classical times? Gonna hold out and see if anyone who hasn't spoken as much wants to weigh in.
Is it alright if I speak?
Yeah, that's fine.
It seems that instead of viewing all the modern miracles of life with timing and with convenience, he instead finds value in a kind of spirit, the sublime, which he's unable to find in his actual current day-to-day life. and feel that even retreating into mythology and pagan beliefs is a step advanced from where we've ended up.
Yeah, great. At least, even if he were a pagan, at least he'd be living out in nature. At least he'd be living in like the Akkadian state in Thomas Cole's The Course of Empire, right? Before the consummation of civilization painting, he wants to live in a state before then, where you're spending more time outside, where there's more wonder in the world, where if you feel an ocean breeze, you see that and you think, there's the divine in that, and not just, oh yes, air particles moving around. Good. Any other thoughts about The World Is Too Much With Us, the Romantics, or anything like that? Okay, cool. So I'll wrap it up there. That's our first taste of Romanticism. We'll do some more Wordsworth tomorrow. And then on Friday, we're going to shift gears. Our prelude to Frankenstein is going to be this longer poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We'll start that on Friday. I think that's about it. So, and again, if any of this talk of poetry has inspired you and you want to submit a poem to Gazebo, email it to me. I'll be happy to include it. I think that's all. All right. Thanks for your participation today, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow. And I'll check out Tom Ritchie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Bye, guys.